I sat in the witness box, my hands folded calmly in my lap, and looked directly at my sister-in-law across the courtroom. Caroline's perfectly made-up face showed just the right amount of vulnerable hope. Her expensive lawyer had positioned her at the defense table with her shoulders slightly hunched, her Hermes bag carefully hidden, her jewelry removed except for her wedding ring. She looked like a victim. She'd always been good at that. My brother Marcus sat behind her in the gallery, his face tight with tension. Next to him, my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My father's hand rested on her shoulder, his expression carved from stone. They were all staring at me with the same desperate, demanding look I remembered so well. Tell the story. Protect the family. Save Caroline. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Chen, approached the witness stand. Ms. Winters, thank you for being here today. I know this must be difficult. Not at all, I said clearly. My voice didn't shake. It had shaken the first time I'd sat in this exact seat, 3 years ago, or 3 years from now, depending on how you counted time. The first time I'd been so terrified, so beaten down, so desperate for my family's approval that I'd said exactly what they told me to say. The first time I'd lied. Ms. Chen glanced at her notes. You were the chief financial officer of Winters Capital Management from 2018 until the company's collapse in January of this year, is that correct? Yes. And during that time, you worked directly with the defendant, Caroline Winters, who served as the company's vice president of client relations? Yes. I could feel my mother's prayers like physical pressure against my back. I could sense my brother's panic, sharp as ozone before a lightning strike. Caroline's lawyer had already tried to have my testimony excluded, arguing I was biased, that I had a personal vendetta. The judge had denied the motion. They had no idea. The first time through this life, I'd sat here at 28 years old, exhausted and hollow, after months of my family's relentless pressure. My mother had cried. My father had raged. Marcus had begged. Caroline herself had come to my apartment with tears streaming down her face, swearing she'd been set up, that she was innocent, that the evidence was fabricated. Please, she'd sobbed, gripping my hands. You're the only one who can save me. You're the only one they'll believe. Just tell them you authorized those transfers. Tell them you knew about the offshore accounts. Tell them it was all part of the legitimate business strategy. It's your company too. You're the CFO. They'll believe you were just doing your job. But I didn't authorize them, I'd whispered. Caroline, I didn't even know about them until the FBI showed up. Does that matter? Her tears had dried up remarkably fast. Do you want to see your brother's wife go to prison? Do you want to destroy this family? Everything my father built? Your father built? Not her father, my father. Because Caroline had never been a Winters by blood, only by marriage. But she'd understood from day one how to use that name like a weapon and a shield. I'd caved. Of course I had. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my family's love, trying to be good enough, trying to prove I deserved a place at their table. My brother was the golden child, charming and handsome and effortlessly beloved. I was the spare, the practical one, the one who did the actual work while Marcus networked and schmoozed clients. So I'd lied, they say, under oath. I'd committed perjury to save Caroline. I'd testified that I'd authorized the wire transfers to the offshore accounts, that I'd set up the shell companies as part of a tax strategy, that the missing $50 million was all accounted for in legitimate business expenses that I'd personally approved. The prosecutor had been skeptical, but she couldn't prove I was lying. Caroline's lawyer had painted me as a dedicated CFO who'd been a bit too aggressive with financial instruments, and Caroline as an innocent VP who'd simply followed my lead. Caroline had walked free. I had been disbarred from serving on any corporate board. My professional reputation had been shredded, but I'd stayed silent, and my family had been so grateful. My mother had actually hugged me. Marcus had called me his hero. My father had shaken my hand and said, "You did the right thing." For about 6 months, I'd basked in their approval, even as I struggled to find work, even as my savings dwindled, even as doors slammed shut in my face everywhere I turned in the financial world. Then Caroline had filed for divorce. She'd taken Marcus for everything he had in the settlement, claiming emotional distress from the trial, claiming he'd known all along about my supposed financial crimes and had pressured her to stay silent. She'd walked away with the house, the cars, half of his trust fund, and full custody of their daughter, Emma, my beloved niece. My brother had been destroyed. He'd turned to alcohol, lost his job, ended up in rehab, and my parents had blamed me. If you'd just been more careful with those accounts, my mother had said, if you hadn't been so reckless, none of this would have happened. Caroline wouldn't have felt forced to protect herself. They'd actually blamed me for Caroline divorcing Marcus, for Caroline taking everything, as if I'd held a gun to her head and forced her to embezzle $50 million. I'd tried to tell them the truth then. I'd tried to explain that I'd lied, that Caroline had stolen the money, that I'd only said those things to protect her. My father had slapped me, the only time in my life he'd ever struck me. "Don't you dare," he'd said, his voice shaking with rage. "Don't you dare try to destroy what's left of this family with more of your lies. You've done enough damage." They'd cut me off completely. No calls, no emails, no birthday cards. When I'd shown up at Christmas, security had turned me away at the gate. I'd had nothing, no career, no family, no savings. I'd moved into a tiny studio apartment in a bad part of town and taken a job as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm that didn't do background checks too carefully. And then, one February morning, I'd seen the news. Caroline Winters, socialite and philanthropist, was engaged to billionaire tech mogul Richard Zhang. They were planning a wedding at a French chateau. The photos showed Carolyn dripping in diamonds, her smile radiant, her daughter Emma beside her in a matching designer dress. She'd stolen my entire life, and she'd won. That night, I'd stood on the balcony of my studio apartment 5 stories up and looked down at the concrete below. I hadn't meant to fall, or maybe I had. The police had called it an accident. The railing had been rusted through, a violation of building codes. But I remembered the moment. I'd leaned against it, the moment I'd felt it give way, the moment I'd thought, finally, it's over. I'd woken up on my 26th birthday 2 years before the FBI raided Winters Capital Management. The first few days, I'd thought I was hallucinating. Grief-induced psychosis, maybe, or a coma dream. But the details were too perfect, too consistent. I was in my old apartment, the nice one I'd had before everything fell apart. My closet was full of clothes I'd donated or sold years ago. My phone showed the date, March 15th, 2 years in the past. And when I'd gone into work at Winters Capital Management, my father's pride and joy, I'd still had my corner office. My nameplate still read Chief Financial Officer. Caroline had breezed past me in the hallway with a cheerful "morning," and I'd nearly vomited. Because I knew. I knew what she was doing. I knew that in the back office, in accounts I didn't have access to yet, she was already setting up the shell companies. She was already siphoning money. She was already building the trap that would destroy everything, and she was planning to blame me. This time, I didn't confront her. I didn't warn my family. I didn't try to stop her. I documented everything. I set up a separate encrypted email account and started forwarding myself every suspicious transaction I found. I planted keystroke loggers on Caroline's computer, highly illegal, but I was already a criminal in one timeline. What was one more crime? I befriended her assistant and took her out for wine-soaked lunches where she complained about Caroline's increasingly bizarre demands. Wire this money here, set up this account there, don't tell anyone. I became invisible. The overlooked daughter, the diligent CFO, the family workhorse. I made sure Caroline never suspected I was watching. When the FBI finally came, I had 17 months of evidence stored in 3 separate cloud accounts, backed up on physical drives, hidden in 3 different TAS locations. I had proof of every transfer, every shell company, every forged signature. I had recordings of Caroline bragging to her friends about the offshore accounts she'd set up. I had emails where she'd explicitly instructed her assistant to falsify records. And critically, I had proof that I'd tried to investigate the irregularities and had been shut down by Caroline herself, who'd used her influence with my father to keep me away from her accounts. I'd given it all to the FBI during my initial interview. Then I'd hired the best criminal defense lawyer I could afford and made it very clear. I would cooperate fully, but I would not lie. The prosecutor had granted me immunity in exchange for my testimony. Now, sitting in the witness box for the second time, I felt nothing but clarity. Ms. Chen's voice pulled me back to the present. "Ms. Winters, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" "She's my sister-in-law," I said. "She's married to my brother Marcus. Would you say you were close?" I considered this. The old me would have said yes, desperate for it to be true. No, I said honestly, huh? Caroline was pleasant to me in social settings, but we weren't friends. She was very focused on her own advancement within the company. Caroline's lawyer stood as some objection, Your Honor, speculation as to Ms. Caroline Winters' motives. Sustained, the judge said. Ms. Winters, please stick to facts you observed directly. Of course, Your Honor. I turned back to Ms. Chen. Caroline and I had a professional relationship. We worked together at Winters Capital Management. And during the time you worked together, did you notice anything unusual about the company's finances? This was it, the moment where the first time I'd said no, where I'd covered for her, where I'd lit myself on fire to keep her warm. Yes, I said clearly. I noticed significant irregularities starting in approximately June of 2022. In the gallery, my mother made a small sound. Marcus leaned forward. Caroline's face went very, very still. What kind of irregularities? Ms. Chen asked. Wire transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Requests for funds that didn't match up with any client activity. New shell companies being formed without my authorization, despite my role as CFO. I kept my voice level, professional. When I tried to investigate, I was told these were Caroline's projects and that I should focus on other areas. Who told you this? Caroline herself initially, then my father, who was the company's CEO. He said Caroline was working on expanding our international client base and needed discretion. Did you believe that? At first, yes, but the amounts kept growing. By October of 2022, I estimated we had approximately $15 million in outflows that I couldn't properly account for. What did you do? I scheduled a meeting with my father and Caroline to discuss it. Caroline assured us these were legitimate business development expenses that would pay off in the long term. She provided some documentation that seemed to support this, contracts with European firms, letters of intent from potential clients. Were those documents legitimate? I believe they were forged, I said. But at the time, I didn't have the expertise to verify them. I deferred to Caroline's judgment, which was a mistake on my part. Ms. Chen walked me through it step by step. How the transfers had accelerated. How I'd grown more concerned. How I'd finally demanded access to Caroline's accounts in December 2022. And what happened when you made that demand? Caroline became very angry. She told me I was overstepping my authority and that I should be grateful I even had a job at the family company. She implied that my father only tolerated me out of obligation. I watched Caroline's face. She was whispering urgently to her lawyer now, her composure cracking. Did you gain access to the accounts? No, Caroline went to my father and convinced him that I was being difficult and trying to undermine her projects. He sided with her and told me to back off. How did that make you feel? Objection, Caroline's lawyer called. Relevance. Your Honor, I'm establishing the witness's state of mind and credibility, Ms. Chen said. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Ms. Winters. I took a breath. It made me feel like I always felt in my family, like I was the problem, like I was never good enough, never trusted, never truly one of them. My voice stayed steady even as I spoke these truths I'd never been allowed to say out loud. So I stopped pushing. I told myself that Caroline must know what she was doing and that I should just focus on my own work. When did you discover the full extent of the fraud? When the FBI raided our offices on January 12th of this year. They seized all our records and showed me evidence of $50 million in funds that had been transferred to offshore accounts controlled by Caroline. $50 million? Yes. And had you authorized any of these transfers? This was the question. The exact same question the prosecutor had asked me the first time. The question I'd answered with a lie that had saved Caroline and destroyed me. I looked directly at Caroline. Her eyes were wide, pleading. I could see her mouthing something. Please. Just like she'd begged in my apartment, tears streaming down her face. Just like she'd sworn she was innocent. Just like she'd promised she'd make it up to me. Just like she'd destroyed my brother, taken my family, and walked away to marry a billionaire while I'd been left with nothing. No, I said, my voice ringing clear in the silent courtroom. I did not authorize any of those transfers. I had no knowledge of the offshore accounts until the FBI investigation. I never approved the creation of the shell companies. I never signed off on any of these transactions. My mother was crying now, loud gasping sobs. My father's face was purple with rage. Marcus had his head in his hands. But Ms. Winters, Ms. Chen said, and I heard the sharp satisfaction in her voice. The defense has suggested that you were the primary architect of this scheme and that Ms. Caroline Winters was simply following your instructions. Is there any truth to that? None whatsoever. Can you prove that? Yes. I reached into my bag and pulled out a USB drive, holding it up. This contains 17 months of evidence I collected documenting Caroline's activities. Emails, wire transfer records, recordings of conversations, keystroke logs from her computer, all time-stamped and verified. I provided copies to the FBI and then the prosecution, and I'm happy to walk through any of it in detail. The courtroom erupted. Caroline's lawyer was on his feet, shouting objections. My mother was wailing. Caroline herself had gone sheet white, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Order in this court! When things finally settled down, Ms. Chen smiled. No further questions, Your Honor. Caroline's lawyer approached the stand like he was walking to his own execution. His opening gambit was predictable. Ms. Winters, isn't it true that you and the defendant have had a difficult relationship? Yes. Isn't it true that you've always been jealous of Caroline? That she married your brother, the successful one, while you remained alone? I could have been hurt by this. The first time I would have been. Now I just felt tired. I don't think my romantic life is relevant to whether or not Caroline embezzled $50 million. A few people in the gallery laughed. The judge looked amused. The lawyer flushed. Isn't it true that you've harbored resentment toward Caroline for years? I've harbored resentment toward my entire family for years, I said honestly. They've treated me as less important, less valuable, less worthy of respect than my brother for my entire life. But that doesn't change the facts of this case. So you admit you have a motive to lie. I have a motive to tell the truth, I corrected. The first time Caroline asked me to lie for her, I did it. I was so desperate for my family's approval that I was willing to commit perjury. But I've learned something since then. Their approval isn't worth having. The truth is more valuable than their love. The lawyer blinked. He hadn't expected that. He tried a few more angles, suggesting I was mentally unstable, that I'd fabricated the evidence, that I was the real criminal trying to frame an innocent woman. But I had the recordings. I had the emails. I had 17 months of meticulous documentation, and every time he tried to poke a hole in my story, I plugged it with another piece of evidence. Finally, he gave up. No further questions. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I walked past Caroline's table. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging in. How could you? She hissed. After everything we've done for you, after everything this family gave you. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. She was crying now, real tears, tears of fury and fear. You gave me nothing, I said quietly. You took everything, but not this time. I pulled my arm free and walked out of the courtroom. The trial lasted another 3 weeks. I was recalled twice more to testify, each time providing more evidence, more documentation, more proof of Caroline's guilt. The defense tried to paint me as a mastermind, a vengeful sister-in-law with an axe to grind, a woman scorned. But the evidence didn't lie. The emails showed Caroline's explicit instructions to her assistant to falsify records. The keystroke logs showed her accessing the offshore accounts from her computer. The wire transfer records showed her authorization codes, her digital signatures, her fingerprints all over every transaction. The USDT recordings were perhaps the most damaging. Caroline, drunk at a charity gala, bragging to her friends about the nest egg she was building for when she finally got tired of playing happy family with the boring Winters clan. Caroline on the phone with her secret boyfriend. Yes, she'd been cheating on Marcus the entire time, talking about how much money she'd socked away. Caroline laughing about how easy it was to manipulate that idiot CFO who's so desperate for daddy's approval, she'll believe anything. That had hurt, hearing it played in court. But it had also been freeing in a way, because it confirmed what I'd always suspected. They'd never loved me. I'd never been family to them, not really. I'd been a tool, a means to an end, a convenient scapegoat. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Caroline guilty on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, tax evasion, 18 counts in total. At sentencing, the judge gave her 12 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay back the full $50 million plus penalties. Since she'd already spent most of it on jewelry, cars, and her chateau wedding that would now never happen, she'd declared bankruptcy. Richard Zhang had broken off their engagement the day she was indicted. Apparently, billionaires didn't like to date convicted felons. My brother Marcus filed for divorce while she was awaiting sentencing. In the settlement, he got full custody of Emma. Caroline would have supervised visitation rights for 1 hour per week once she got out of prison. As for my parents, they'd tried to reconcile with me after the verdict. My mother had shown up at my apartment with tears and apologies, explaining that they'd just been trying to protect the family, that they'd never imagined Caroline was really guilty, that they'd thought I was being difficult. I'd listened politely and then closed the door in her face. My father had tried a different approach: anger. He'd called me, raging about how I'd destroyed the family name, how I'd sent an innocent woman to prison, how I'd ruined Marcus's marriage. Caroline ruined Marcus's marriage when she stole $50 million and cheated on him, I'd said calmly. I just told the truth. You broke this family apart. No, Dad. You broke this family apart when you chose Caroline over me. When you chose to believe a liar over your own daughter. When you made it clear that I would never be as important as Marcus, never be as valued, never be enough. I took a breath. But I'm done trying to earn your love. I'm done setting myself on fire to keep this family warm. You made your choice. Now live with it. I'd hung up and blocked his number. The fallout was extensive. Winter's capital management had collapsed. The company couldn't survive the scandal. My father had to declare bankruptcy. They'd lost the family estate, the vacation homes, most of their wealth. My mother blamed me for that too, conveniently, forgetting that Caroline was the one who'd embezzled the money. Marcus, surprisingly, had reached out to apologize. We'd met for coffee, and he'd been genuinely remorseful. I should have believed you, he'd said. When you tried to tell us the truth after the divorce, I should have listened. Yes, I'd agreed. You should have. Can you forgive me? I'd thought about it. About the lifetime of being second best, of being overlooked, of being used. About how he'd stood by while Caroline destroyed me the first time. About how he'd let our parents cut me off. Maybe someday, I'd said. But not yet. You hurt me too much, Marcus. All of you did. He'd nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. And Emma asks about you. She misses her Aunt Jen. That had almost broken me. Emma, my sweet niece, who'd been 3 years old in the first timeline and whom I'd adored, who'd be 7 now, old enough to understand that her mother was in prison and her family had fallen apart. Tell her I miss her too, I'd said. And tell her that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and we all have to deal with the consequences. Tell her to always, always tell the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. 6 months after the trial, I started my own consulting firm. I specialized in forensic accounting, helping companies identify fraud and embezzlement. Turned out my experience made me uniquely qualified. I was good at it, very good. Within a year, I had more clients than I could handle. Within 2 years, I'd hired a staff of 15. Within 3 years, I was lecturing at business schools and testifying as an expert witness in white-collar crime cases. I never married. I dated occasionally, but I was cautious about letting people in. The betrayal had left scars, even if I'd gotten revenge. But I was happy. Genuinely bone-deep happy in a way I'd never been in my first life. I had work I was proud of. I had friends who valued me for myself, not for what I could do for them. I had a beautiful apartment in the city and a dog named Justice who thought I hung the moon. 5 years after the trial, I got a letter forwarded from my lawyer. It was from Caroline. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Dear Jennifer, it began in her familiar handwriting. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm writing anyway because I need you to know something. You were right about everything, about me, about your family, about the truth being more important than approval. I spent my entire life manipulating people, using them, discarding them when they were no longer useful. I thought I was so clever. I thought I could get away with anything. But you were smarter. You were patient. You documented everything. And when the moment came, you told the truth, even though it cost you your family. I've had a lot of time to think in here about the kind of person I was, about the damage I did, about the fact that I destroyed a woman who never did anything to me except try to be good enough for a family that didn't deserve her. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to know you won. Not just the trial, not just the case. You won at being a better person than I could ever be. I hope you're happy. I hope you've built a life you're proud of. You deserve that. I'm sorry. For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry, Caroline. I read it twice, then put it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't visit her in prison. I didn't forgive her. But I did eventually reach out to Marcus. Emma was 10 now, old enough to understand complicated things, old enough to know her aunt. We met at a park, the three of us. Emma was shy at first, but when I gave her the book I'd brought, a collection of stories about brave girls who fought for what was right, she lit up. Mom said you were the bad guy, she said, with the blunt honesty of children. But Dad says you were the hero, which is true. I knelt down to her level. Both, maybe, or neither. I just told the truth, even when people didn't want to hear it, even when it hurt people I loved. Do you think that makes me good or bad? She considered this seriously. I think it makes you brave. I smiled. Thank you, Emma. That means a lot. We started meeting regularly after that. Once a month at first, then twice, then weekly. I taught Emma about math and science and showed her that being smart wasn't something to hide. Marcus and I slowly, carefully rebuilt something that might someday be a real sibling relationship. My parents never apologized. They lived in a small condo now, their fortune gone, and they blamed me until the day they died. I went to their funerals out of obligation, but I didn't cry. 10 years after the trial, I was giving a keynote speech at a financial crimes conference when someone asked, "Do you regret testifying against your sister-in-law? Do you wish you'd maintained family loyalty?" The room went silent. Everyone knew my story. I thought about the first timeline, about the lies I'd told, about how I'd destroyed myself trying to earn love that was never really offered, about the night I'd fallen from that balcony, broken and alone and convinced I'd deserved every bit of misery that had been heaped on me. I thought about this timeline, about the moment I'd sat in that witness stand and chosen truth over approval, about walking out of that courtroom knowing I'd just blown up my entire family but feeling lighter than I had in years. No, I said firmly, I don't regret it for a second. Loyalty is earned, not owed, and the truth matters more than comfort, more than reputation, more than keeping up appearances. The truth set me free, even though it cost me almost everything. I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. The applause was thunderous. That night, I went home to my apartment, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony, a real balcony this time, with a solid railing and a view of the city lights. Justice curled up at my feet. Somewhere across town, Marcus was putting Emma to bed, and maybe reading her the book I'd given her about brave girls. Somewhere in a federal prison, Caroline was halfway through her sentence, probably still convinced she was the victim in all this. Somewhere in whatever afterlife existed, maybe my parents were finally understanding that the daughter they'd overlooked had been worth more than they'd ever realized. But I wasn't thinking about any of them. I was thinking about the girl I'd been in that witness box the first time, terrified and desperate and willing to lie to earn scraps of love from people who would never truly value her. I was thinking about the woman I'd become when I'd sat in that same witness box the second time and spoken the truth clearly, knowing exactly what it would cost and choosing it anyway. I was thinking about how sometimes the universe gives you a second chance and sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something worth having. I raised my glass to the city lights, to the life I'd built from ashes, to the truth that had destroyed a family and freed me all at once. To rebirth, I whispered, and to telling the whole truth, no matter what. The wine tasted like victory, and I had never, in either life, been happier. 20 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at Harvard Law School. The topic: Ethics in Forensic Accounting When Family Loyalty Conflicts with Legal Duty. Emma was in the audience. She was a law student now, bright and fierce and determined to fight for justice. She'd chosen to study corporate law, specifically fraud prosecution. She said I'd inspired her. After the lecture, during the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. "Ms. Winters, your case is studied in ethics classes across the country. You're held up as an example of moral courage. But I have to ask, was it worth it? You lost your parents, your family's fortune, your social position. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd just gone along with it?" I didn't have to wonder. I knew exactly what that life looked like. "I do know what that life would have been like," I said slowly. "Because I lived it. Not literally, perhaps, but in every way that matters. I lived a life where I put other people's comfort over my own integrity, where I made myself smaller to make them feel bigger, where I lied to protect people who would never protect me." I paused, looking out at the sea of young faces, all of them probably wrestling with their own versions of this dilemma. That life ended with me broken and alone, convinced I deserved nothing better, having sacrificed everything for people who saw me as a tool rather than a person. This life, the one where I told the truth, gave me self-respect. It gave me work I'm proud of. It gave me my real relationships built on honesty rather than obligation. I gestured to Emma, sitting in the third row with tears in her eyes. It gave me my niece back, but as someone who chooses to know me rather than someone who's obligated to tolerate me. Was it worth it? Yes. 1,000 times yes. Because I'd rather have nothing and my integrity than everything and my soul in chains. The applause started slowly, then built. Emma was the first one standing. After the lecture, she rushed up to hug me. "That was amazing, Aunt Jen. Mom wrote to me again, you know. She's getting out next year." I stiffened. Caroline would have served 14 years by then, with time off for good behavior. "How do you feel about that?" Emma shrugged. "Conflicted. She's my mom, and part of me will always love her. But she's also a criminal who hurt a lot of people, including you and Dad. I'm going to see her when she gets out, but I'm not letting her back into my life like nothing happened. That seems wise." "She wants to see you too. She asked if I'd ask you." I thought about it. About the woman who'd stolen from my family's company, who'd manipulated me into perjury, who'd destroyed my brother and tried to destroy me. About the letter she'd written, taking responsibility. "Tell her I'll think about it," I said finally. "But I'm not making any promises." Emma nodded. "Fair enough." "Hey, are we still on for dinner this weekend? I want you to meet someone." "Someone?" She blushed. "A guy from my contracts class. He's really nice, and I think you'll like him. Plus, I want you to do your scary forensic accountant thing and make sure he's not secretly embezzling from student organizations or something." I laughed. "It would be my pleasure." The following year, Caroline was released from prison. She reached out through Marcus, asking to meet. I agreed, curious despite myself. We met at a cafe downtown, neutral territory. She looked older, harder, but also somehow more real. The polished veneer was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like humility. "Thank you for coming," she said when I sat down. I almost didn't. "I wouldn't have blamed you." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I've played this conversation in my head 10,000 times. I've practiced what I'd say, how I'd apologize, how I'd make you understand. But now that you're here, I realize there's nothing I can say that would make any of it better." "Probably not," I agreed. "I destroyed your life. Or tried to, and you gave me exactly what I deserved." She looked up, met my eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to tell you, face to face, that you were right about all of it. I know I was right. She laughed, a brittle sound. I said, God, you've changed. The old you would have been falling over yourself to smooth things over, to make me feel better about being a criminal. The old me died a long time ago, I said. Fell off a balcony, actually, or jumped. I've never been quite sure which. She looked confused, but I didn't elaborate. What are you going to do now? I asked. Now that you're out, survive, I guess. Try to be a better person than I was. Try to build some kind of relationship with Emma, though I know I don't deserve it. Try to. She trailed off. I don't know, I lost everything. My husband, my daughter, my freedom, my reputation. I have nothing. There was a time when I would have felt sorry for her, when I would have offered to help, to give her money or connections or support, when I would have set myself on fire to provide her with warmth. But I'd learned. You have your life, I said. That's more than nothing. What you do with it is up to you. Will you ever forgive me? I thought about it. Really thought about it. About the girl I'd been, desperate for approval. About the woman I'd become, forged in the fire of betrayal and rebirth. Maybe, I said. Someday, but not today. Not yet. You hurt me too badly, Caroline. You used me, manipulated me, tried to destroy me. And you would have succeeded if I hadn't gotten a second chance. A second chance? Never mind. I stood up. I hope you figure out how to be a better person. I genuinely do. But I can't be part of that journey. I can't be your redemption arc or your proof of growth. I need to protect myself first. She nodded, tears running down her face. I understand. Thank you for meeting me. And Jennifer? Yes? I'm glad you won. I'm glad you told the truth. I'm glad you're happy. You deserve it. I left without responding. Emma got married 3 years later, and I stood beside her as maid of honor. Her husband was a good man, honest and kind. Looked like she hung the stars. Marcus walked her down the aisle, sober and healthy and working as a counselor for other people recovering from family trauma. Caroline was not invited. I started a foundation that year providing legal assistance and counseling to people who'd been pressured into covering up crimes for their families. We called it the Truth Project. Emma helped me set it up, using her legal skills to navigate the nonprofit regulations. You're helping people, she said, as we filed the paperwork. People like you were, the first time around. There was no first time around, I said automatically. Then I paused. But yes, people like I could have been, if things had gone differently. People who need someone to tell them that telling the truth is worth it. The foundation grew. We helped hundreds of people in the first year alone. Children pressured to lie for abusive parents, spouses coerced into covering up fraud, employees threatened into silence about corporate crimes. Every time we helped someone choose truth over loyalty, I felt a little bit lighter. On the 30th anniversary of the trial, a journalist wanted to do a profile on me. The woman who brought down an empire they wanted to call it. It wasn't an empire, I corrected. It was a mid-sized investment firm engaged in fraud. And I didn't bring it down. Caroline did that herself. I just told the truth about it. Still makes a good story. Make it a true story then, not a sensational one. The article, when it came out, was fair. It talked about the trial, about my testimony, about the foundation. It interviewed some of the people we'd helped. It even included a statement from Caroline who said, Jennifer Winters is the bravest person I know, and I say that as someone whose life she destroyed. She chose integrity over everything, and the world is better for it. Emma read it and cried. I'm so proud of you, Aunt Jen. You turned something horrible into something beautiful. I turned the truth into freedom, I corrected. There's nothing more beautiful than that. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the locked drawer in my desk where I kept a few important documents. My testimony from the trial, Caroline's letter from prison, a photo of Emma at her wedding, and a newspaper clipping from the first timeline, the one I'd hidden away before I'd fallen from that balcony. Socialite Caroline Winters to wed billionaire Richard Zhang. I looked at that photo of Caroline, radiant and triumphant, standing on the corpse of my destroyed life. Then I looked at the photo from this timeline. Caroline in handcuffs, being led away from the courthouse. I burned the first photo, let it curl and char in the sink until there was nothing left but ash. That life is over, I said to the empty apartment. This is the real one, the true one. Justice whined and put her head on my knee. I scratched her ears. You know what the best part is? I asked her. I don't need them anymore. I don't need their approval, their love, their acceptance. I built a life without them, and it's better than anything I had when I was trying to earn their scraps. She wagged her tail, not understanding, but supportive anyway. I poured myself a glass of wine and went out to my balcony. The city sprawled below me, full of light and life and possibility. Somewhere out there, Caroline was living in a halfway house, working a minimum wage job, trying to rebuild. Somewhere out there, Marcus was putting his grandchildren to bed. Emma had given him 2 beautiful grandkids who called me Aunt Jenny and thought I was magic. Somewhere out there, my parents were dead and buried, never having understood why their daughter had chosen truth over family, but I was here, alive, successful, respected, loved by people who knew the real me, free. I raised my glass to the sky, to the universe that had given me a second chance, to the moment I'd sat in that witness box and chosen integrity over approval. To rebirth, I whispered, to truth, to freedom. And somewhere, in whatever cosmic accounting system tracks such things, I knew the ledger was balanced. Caroline had taken everything from me in one life, and I'd taken everything from her in return. But more than that, I'd taken back myself. I'd reclaimed my voice, my truth, my right to exist without apology. That was the real victory. Not the trial, not the verdict, not the foundation or the success or the respect. The real victory was that I'd looked my family in the face and said, I deserve better than this. And then I'd walked away and built better. That was worth more than all the Winters family fortune, all the social status, all the approval I'd ever craved. That was worth everything. 40 years after the trial, on my 70th birthday, Emma threw me a party. The house was full of people, colleagues from the foundation, former clients we'd helped, Emma's family, Marcus and his partner. Emma stood up to make a toast. To my Aunt Jennifer, she said, raising her glass, who taught me that telling the truth is the bravest thing you can do, who showed me that family is who you choose, not who you're born to, who proved that you can lose everything and still win if you never lose yourself. Everyone drank. Someone asked me to make a speech. I stood up, looking around at all these people who knew me, really knew me, and loved me anyway. I'm not much for speeches, I said. But I will say this. Life gives some people second chances. I was lucky enough to get one. And when I did, I made different choices. I chose truth over comfort. I chose integrity over approval. I chose myself over people who would never choose me. I paused, looking at Emma, at Marcus, at all the lives we'd touched through the foundation. And it cost me. It cost me my parents, my family's wealth, my comfortable life. But it gave me something worth so much more. It gave me the ability to look at myself in the mirror and like the person looking back. It gave me the freedom to build a life on my own terms. It gave me all of you. I raised my glass. So here's to second chances. Here's to telling the truth, even when it hurts. Here's to choosing yourself, even when everyone says you're wrong. Here's to being brave enough to let the wrong people go so the right people can find you. Here's to rebirth. We drank, and the party went on into the night, full of laughter and love and the kind of joy that only comes from living authentically. Later, after everyone had gone home, I stood on my balcony one last time, looking out at the city I'd built my life in. Somewhere out there, Caroline was 72, maybe also looking back on the choices she'd made, the life she'd lived. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't love her either. She was just A person who'd made terrible choices and paid for them. A cautionary tale. A reminder of who I'd almost become if I hadn't been given a second chance to choose differently. Thank you, I whispered to whoever or whatever had sent me back. To the universe, to fate, to my own desperate will to survive. Thank you for the chance to tell the truth. Thank you for the chance to be free. The city lights twinkled like stars and I smiled. I had told the whole truth, and she had lost everything. But more importantly, I had won everything that mattered. I had won myself, and that was the greatest victory of all.